It's the end of the year, and we should talk about the best video games of 2024. Now, not the ones that have received a whole bunch of mainstream attention, not the ones that are selling incredibly well. I'm talking about the ones that me and you played that are just damn good, that are worth recommending, Josh Brown.
The ones where you say, hey, you should play this game, and everyone looks at you like you're a little bit of a freak, truth be told, but they are definitely worth checking out, Scott Tilford.
So with all that in mind, I'm Scott.
I'm Josh.
And these are the best video games of 2024 you're not playing. First, some honorable mentions. I don't know how many you have to throw in here, but I want to throw out 3 names that I'm not going to go in detail on. But one is Trepang 2's Blade Kisser DLC, which I know sounds like a weird elven curse, but it's actually an addition to a game that came out last year on consoles. A really cool, super fast, almost arena-style first-person shooter, but it's extremely stylish, lots of slow motion. Trepang 2's Blade Kisser DLC is incredible. Pizza Tower is a really cool 2D platformer. Also, Yars Rising, which is a game from Atari. Atari's got a whole thing going on, trying to make new entries in various franchises, and Yars Rising is a Metroidvania set in the Yars Revenge universe, and I recommend that if you have a penchant for Atari.
I only have one thing to throw onto this, and it is, of course, the home of the big boner itself, Shadows of the Damned Hella Remastered.
The big boner.
A game that I knew absolutely nothing about, Scott, and went into and got my mind absolutely blown by how of its time it is, how unashamedly itself it is, and just how much fun a lot of those 360 era games were when they did not care either way.
Onto the main list, number 10, Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown. This is a game that got absolutely slated at launch. It's genuinely one of my best games of the year, if not my number 1. I haven't really started thinking about my personal top 10 just yet, but this is a phenomenal Metroidvania that I would say moves the entire genre forward in terms of how you explore the maps, the fact that you can take ostensibly in-game screenshots of various parts of the maps to remind yourself, you know, where else you haven't been just yet. But it has such an awesome art style. The combat is so tight. I get that so many people didn't expect a platformer from Prince of Persia. Ironic, because that's obviously what it started as. But a lot of people came off the Sands of Time trilogy. There was then the Sands of Time remake that was announced that looked horrible. And then when we got a look at the next main Prince of Persia, you know, there was always that assumption, I guess on Ubisoft's part, that they would have done the remaster, you know, reminded people how much they love Prince of Persia, and then done a new installment. And that's just not what people wanted. They didn't want to, maybe they wanted a more third-person hack and slash type thing, or whatever. But it sold like hell. It sold like 5 copies. Like the developers, the little wing of people who put this together inside Ubisoft have sadly been redistributed amongst Ubisoft because it just didn't land very well. But all of those who have played it have come away extremely strong on it. And I honestly cannot recommend it enough. I think it's a phenomenal, like I said, Metroidvania, but just a really, really tight, expertly put together video game with stellar DLC. Like if you like hard platforming sections and extremely tight combat, like I said, the DLC just takes that to the next level. But it's just such a phenomenal game, and it deserves to have its players, even though the amount of people that could pick it up now isn't going to make much difference to those sales at this point.
It's such a shame, though, isn't it? Because I feel like this seems like it's the best thing that Ubisoft has produced in so long.
Yep.
Certainly the most innovative and unique and, like you said, genre-pushing thing, and yet it just did not sell in a year where we've had so many great, I feel, Metroidvanias that just did not sell. Spoiler alert, but I've got one that I'm going to mention in a few entries' time. And what a shame. Why is no one playing these games, Scott? Number 9, Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn. You will not believe how many takes it took us to just get through that title there because Scott Tilford was spreading misinformation around this recording room. But what isn't misinformation, Scott, is just how good Flintlock, The Siege of Dawn is. Now, this is a game that dropped earlier this year. It's a multi-platform title, but it dropped on Game Pass, which is where I played it. And I was going into it expecting a pretty straightforward Souls-like. That's how it seemed like it was being portrayed in the trailers, even if there were flashy finishing moves and a few more enemies than you would maybe expect from a straight-up Souls influence game. However, this thing is so much more ambitious than I thought it was going to be. It's definitely still within that AA remit, which means there are rough edges here and there. It's not going to be the most expansive video game that you've ever played. It's not going to have the best combat system, but it does have an incredibly solid combat system that is influenced by Souls, but is way faster, is way more immediate, has a little bit more going for it. I think it looks absolutely gorgeous. It has these sort of open areas that are just a joy to explore and use your abilities to get around. It is as much about the platforming and the sort of puzzles within the environment as it is the straight up combat. And it's just a huge surprise. It has so much personality. It looks amazing. It looks incredible. It's one of the best looking games that I played this year. Its art style might not be completely radical in an era where we have a lot of fantasy games that are similar to it. You know, you can look at this and look at something like God of War even side by side and see the influences, but this still manages to feel new and feel novel in the way that it is put together. It is very impressive, and it has a story, Scott, that again surprised me in just how compelling it was. There are some interesting characters there. There is some really tantalizing mythology about the underworld and the gods and the monsters and the myths that make up this title. It is so much more, I think, than the sum of its parts, and a really, really impressive twist on the Souls-like genre.
I feel like the Souls genre itself is so overstuffed at this point. It does take something special to stick out. And I remember the builds of Flintlock coming out, and the general conversation were a lot of people saying, I'm going to check this one out, I'm going to make the time. And then it just feels like, as the year kind of went on, different pockets of certain months where loads of games came out all at once, and Flintlock just couldn't really keep its purchase in terms of, maintaining that hype or whatever. So it is good to know that it turned out all right, and it is worth playing. I needed the very beginning of it, but it was so promising. It does seem like an incredibly well put together Souls-like for a genre that has so many games vying for your attention.
Exactly that. And it is a shame because, like so many games this year, the intro for it is probably the worst part. It doesn't play its hand for a few hours. It doesn't open up for a few hours. And I think you can jump in, play the first 30 minutes or the first 60 minutes and think, well, I've experienced this before. It's not doing anything new. But once you get over that tutorial, once you get introduced to the extra mechanics, you'll realize it isn't just a game that you've played a million times before. It does have its unique ideas. It does have its own original things going for it. And it's just a shame that I think with something that launches on Game Pass, I think a lot of people are encouraged to give that game a go. But if it doesn't grab you instantly, it's very easy to just delete it and download something else. And I think a game like Flintlock definitely benefits from investing into it beyond that first 60-minute stretch.
That is fast becoming the kiss of death of so many games, especially like you said alongside Game Pass. If something can't grab you in the an hour, 2 hours, I think it is an ongoing conversation. How long should you give an average game to pull you in? I think that's just part of the modern gaming industry. Number 8, Kunitsu-Gami, Path of the Goddess. I love that this game exists. It's so good.
You've been shouting this game out all year, Scott, and you have got pretty much everyone in the office interested in this title that I wouldn't have even known had existed without you being in my life. So
it is.
Thank you for that.
Anytime it is nothing less than the future of the industry, God damn it. It is the perfect AA style production. It comes from Capcom, so you're coming from a big AAA vestige veteran studio, choosing to do something a little bit more unique and with different kind of gameplay styles meshed into one. It is half of it is a hack and slasher, a bit like a Devil May Cry or a Platinum style action game or something like that, and half of it is a bit more managerial, where you're sort of looking after your troops, you're pausing time to reassign where people are going to go, you're upgrading their classes, you're making sure that you have that support in the combat itself, and then you have this really just awesome addictive loop of diving back into these small little arenas and doing different goals that manifest on the second time through or things like that. It has that perfect blend of immediacy when it comes to the gameplay mechanics, but just that wider sensation of I am progressing through this and I want to replay the levels. I mentioned before about the modern industry and like different tropes that have emerged, and I feel like now you go through something once, you're kind of done with it. If you even finish it at all, like a lot of the statistics point to 70 to 80% of people not finishing their games at all, whereas Kunitsu-Gami is just such a great selection of levels that has a almost arcadey mentality to it in terms of I'm going to have one more run on this thing, unlock some more stuff, get better dudes, upgrade my guys, and go and fight a boss for the second time to get something else, or go and do a different level and get a different reward. I just think it's so cool to see, and it's got so much heart and soul. Like the levels are built from real world dioramas that are themselves inspired by Japanese mythology and folklore, and even when they put the game out for the part of the launch trailer, they just put on a full-on shadow puppet show, like Japanese mythology puppet show, and just put that on YouTube for people to watch. Like, it's so cool, and there's just so much history in here. I love it. I love everything about the way it's put together. I love what it represents. sense. And I know that it hasn't, it's never going to outsell, if we're talking about Capcom, a Monster Hunter or a Resident Evil or something. But companies like Capcom need to make games like this. And the fact that this exists and has done pretty well and has had that such a positive word of mouth. It is on Game Pass, so if you have Xbox or PC, you can go pick that up. I just think it's absolutely stellar. And it's polished. It's so gorgeous and so pristine. I cannot sing about it enough.
You have touched upon the exact reason why I love that this game exists, and that's because it is from Capcom, a studio that is on a hot streak right now with its biggest franchises, Resident Evil, Devil May Cry, Monster Hunter. It is selling so many copies within those established IPs, but that hasn't meant the total focus on those IPs. It's still a company that is willing to take risks on a game like this that is a bit smaller, that might not have those expectations. This is a company that's also going to release Dragon's Dogma 2 earlier on in the year, and I think in an era where you see companies like WB really getting limited in what they're greenlighting, really focusing in on their billion-dollar IPs, it's just cool that something like this exists from a big publisher, like you said.
You need the mix of everything, like a healthy medium, a healthy art form, a healthy industry should be able to do everything. It shouldn't just be AAAs and it shouldn't just be safe bets. Occasionally you should try something different. Otherwise we end up just doing the same basic templates over and over again, which I think 2024 has proven don't work. Like the bombs this year have been ridiculous, whether that's a Concord or a Suicide Squad or whatever, and people yearn for something better as long as they know that it exists.
Number 7, Tales of Kenzera Zao. Scott, in the previous entry, you spoke about heart and soul, and those two words are exactly what I would describe Tales of Kenzera Zao using, because this thing, even though on its face might seem familiar within the Metroidvania genre, and yes, I did say I was going to get to a Metroidvania game later in this list. Here it is. Even though you are doing similar things as you've done in so many of these games, you are unlocking new elemental abilities, for instance, that allow you to unlock new areas, you're gaining new abilities, you're getting new upgrades, you're opening up the world, and you're indulging in a satisfying combat system. What makes this game separate from its peers, I find, is its central story, which is about this main character essentially coming to terms with life and death within a kind of more grand mythological setting, I guess, for lack of a better term. It's about using, these mythical creatures, these larger than life areas, and tapping into the character's cultural background. It's telling a tale about essentially kind of moving on in how you treat people and how you should treat people, and the ability for life to go on, and with the ability to evolve, essentially, the ability to grow, the ability to learn, the ability to cherish someone even though they're not there, and come to terms with having them be a part of your life, even if they aren't physically a part of your life. And this is all told not only through a great script, but it's told through, like I said, it's told through the environment, it's told through the boss battles, which are excellent, that you encounter, which always have tragic and heartbreaking stories attached to them. It is a very evocative setting with very interesting characters, and that's all backed up by still a really well-playing Metroidvania experience where you are, even though the elemental powers might be something you've experienced before, they're still incredibly satisfying. Scott, it feels great to, for instance, freeze a waterfall so then you can run up it and then double jump off to get to the next area, messing around with the environment in that way and making the powers part of the natural world that's around you. It's so cool. It feels great to play, and yet it is bolstered by that really emotive story at the heart of it that is genuinely moving and is, I think, absolutely worthwhile in experiencing.
Yeah, like that whole thing of the genre coming on such a long way. Like, modern gameplay means that Metroidvanias can play better than ever. I feel like Metroid Dread revitalized a lot of interest in the genre overall, and this year's been a phenomenal year for it. I haven't finished Tales of Kenzera, but I do love it's Abu Bakr Salim's studio, who's like an actor. The whole game's about his relationship with his father and everything, and I like that all of that is in there. Sadly, Kenzera didn't sell very well at all. Salim has got out there and done a bunch of interviews. There's a really good one with him and Colin Moriarty talking about just the reality of going through how negatively received the game was, but how how much of himself is invested in it, and they are able to continue. They're not being redistributed the same way that the Prince of Persia guys are. So hopefully people discover the game. It's one of those that whenever people do play it, they realize it's awesome. I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of it as the holidays kick in. Number 6, Nobody Wants to Die.
Oh.
Nobody wants to play this game.
Why not?
I don't know. It's a phenomenal first-person detective thriller, cyberpunk-style thing. I will admit, and so know that going in, the very end of it is very interpretational. I'm not going to do spoilers, but it has led to a lot of conversation on just what the hell is even going on by the time you have the full picture. But I think when it comes to a sense of place and I was going to swear there, effing gorgeous-looking game, you can't get that much better than Nobody Wants to Die. I love this version of the future, this idea that culture was kind of like locked off past sort of almost where we are now, but a little bit before, and you jump forward like 1,000 years. So you've got all these reference points to previous generations that we have in the real world right now. What would a future look like if those art directions, those art styles, those mentalities were allowed to run wild and design an entire futurescape around that? It does mean that it's almost like LA Noire meets cyberpunk or something like that. And I love the way that the detective stuff comes through. Like you are analyzing crime scenes by using all these future gadgets. It's a bit like Frogware's Sherlock Holmes games. And you can tackle things in different orders. I think one of the best things the game does is pull the wool over your eyes in terms of how much choice you don't really have. Like you are kind of on a set of rails ultimately, and you do need to come to a set of conclusions eventually. You do have agency in the story though. You can make certain choices that branch, especially towards the end. But I found the whole thing to just be incredibly like evocative and so imaginative, like just so much like world lore that was in there, whether it's the text pickups or the different politicians, the way they talk about the rule sets and everything. But yeah, just a super recommendable, very short game if you're looking for a nice sort of 5 to 6 hour game that is just going to wow you up front with the visuals. And I think does deliver on the narrative side. It's just that the very end, I would have personally liked something that was a bit tighter. But I still think that it's recommendable overall. And like I said, mainly for the sense of place, being this sort of, 1950s style detective in a futurescape. Like that, as far as I can think off the top of my head, hasn't really been done.
Yeah.
Cyberpunk owes a lot to film noir, but we've never really seen a cyberpunk cityscape that looks like a 1950s Art Deco, like almost like the BioShock art style put into a cyberpunk space. Like there's a whole mix of influences there that comes across really well.
How does this game, at least last time I checked, not even have a Wikipedia page? What is that about?
I don't know. It is the first game from Critical Hit Games. So it is one of those things that I kind of just saw. It was actually part of the Future Game Show. I think one of the reveals, we are owned by Future. Overall, they do 3 shows a year. This was part of one of the highlight reels. And I remember it just kind of standing out in terms of the way that it looked to play. But it did take that manual investment of tracking it all the way through to launch. And I don't know how well it's done sales-wise. I think when it eventually came out, there was a lot of people looking at it going, this looks next gen, this looks like something I would expect to see on new hardware. And I do think it delivers there. But you're right, the actual follow-up overall has been quite empty. Like it's worth it if you can seek it out. It's on PS5 and other systems, but at the same time, it's quite easy for a game like this to just kind of fall off altogether.
Number 5, Indika. Scott, I don't know if you know, but I really like the game Indika.
I did know this, but tell me more.
If you are a purveyor of the What Culture Gaming podcast, you will already have heard me talk about this game to death. But if for some reason you're not subscribed to the best gaming podcast in the whole wide world, I'll explain this title to you. Essentially, Indika is what Hellblade should have been this year. It is in my opinion, third-person narrative adventure game. It tells the story of the titular Indika, who is a nun essentially grappling with her faith. She is despised by all the other nuns that she lives with and is sent out essentially on a Mickey Mouse task to deliver a letter across the country. But
that just made me think of in high school. It's like, go get some tartan paint.
It essentially is.
Never coming back.
The idea is go send this letter and then don't open it though. If you open it, you're going to get kicked out. Of course, you open it and then they're all like, well, why knew you'd open it? Get away. Essentially, it's exile in a polite form. And what's interesting about this game, I find, is that it is so serious in its themes. It's about this woman wrangling with her faith and the wider faith of the entire country and the morality of that. But it's a game that's also incredibly piss funny. It has this absurd comedic bone to it and this surrealist tone and this surrealist atmosphere, whereby the game will open with a tiny little man doing a little dance out of one of the nuns' mouth.
With incredible music, by the way.
With incredible music backing it. And you just get these super serious moments that often jar with these just ridiculous moments of absurdist comedy. And that idea that you never know what's coming next, it admittedly will not make this a game for everyone. You could play an hour of this and realize this is not the style of writing that I want. This is not the approach to the subject matter that I want. But if you vibe with it, there is genuinely nothing like it this year in terms of its story. And thankfully, that story and the characters that Indika meets on this journey, whether it's a convict who has escaped and is being hunted down by police and soldiers, or the owner, essentially, of this cannery where there are giant fish, Scott, the size of people that are being farmed, because this is, like I said, a surrealist world where proportions don't make sense. The buildings are absolutely ginormous, and it makes you feel like a little ant. The cows are giant cows because, of course, they are.
What is this game?
Exactly, what is this game? I cannot do it justice. The more I try to describe it, the weirder it seems, the more obtuse it seems. But what holds all of these disparate parts together is just really tight puzzle platforming. You are essentially, for the majority of gameplay, walking through areas, trying to solve kind of basic puzzles, but they feel good. They feel great, even though you are just kind of pushing a box from one area to another. It feels tactile, it feels fluid, and the puzzles themselves make sense within this kind of crazy world that's being constructed. So you have to get to you have to get to grips with the rules of the world to then figure out the puzzles in themselves. And it does a lot to ground the actual gameplay. It is definitely entirely singular. It is one of the best directed games of the year in terms of visuals. And yeah, it is, in my opinion, the spiritual successor to the first Hellblade in pushing this character-driven action-adventure style of gameplay in a way that I hoped Hellblade 2 would have, but that sadly was a little bit disappointing for my taste.
No, that was a sadder tale for a different time. I do want to shout out 11-Bit Studios going from the likes of This War of Mine and Frostpunk and then publishing this by Oddmeter, a different developer, but them helping foot the bill kind of thing. To get it over the finish line, I feel like 11-Bit have come a long way. And This War of Mine is still a very recommendable game that's extremely evocative and obviously far more serious than something like Indika, but also Indika has its serious moments too.
Well, I've got to say as well, this is what I was supposed to mention when I was describing the gameplay, but it does have interesting and unique mechanics that tie into the wider themes. For instance, one of the central mechanics is this idea of praying in times of trouble within the story, but that manifests in this kind of dual world that you see. So you have the real world and you have this world that kind of fractures apart, and you press a button literally to pray, and that transforms the world around Indika. And I just think that is really cool to incorporate a strange mechanic that you wouldn't expect to see in another game, like praying, and then make it a part of puzzle solutions and make it a part of the actual gameplay. It's one of those titles where you play it and you think, this couldn't be anything else but a game.
Yeah.
If you can make a movie of it, you can make a TV show, you can put it in a book, and it would lack that special sauce that it gains from being a video game that you control.
It sounds like you're fundamentally playing the idea of relying on faith to knit your world back together, that's just cool. Number 4, Doom and Star Wars Dark Forces remasters. Now, these are 2024 video games, but they wouldn't be in any other of 2024 list. You know the rules here. You've been here for many years, how I categorize these things. However, I need to shout out certain people on this earth who do the Lord's work, and that is Night Dive Studios, that is Digital Eclipse, and that is the approach to certain remasters that Atari overall have taken, Atari being the company that have hoovered up both of these studios to do immaculate remasters and reapproaches of certain classic titles. These specifically are from Night Dive, doing they're remasters of Doom 1 and 2 and Star Wars Dark Forces, but they're enhancing them so much, putting so many quality of life features in there, whether that is 4K 120 frames per second gameplay, adding multiplayer modes to Doom. Some versions of Doom have had them in the past, at the Xbox Live version, but this unifies them and elevates gets everything. If you own any version of Doom so far, you've got an auto-upgraded, version to get everything that has now been put in 2024, and it's just the best playing version of Doom you could get. Now, I love me some Doom anyway, so this was an absolute joy to go back to, speeding it up, making it more fluid, taking that stuff online. Doom Online is absolute chaos, 16-player multiplayer, everyone's firing rocket launchers. It's just a good, fun, arena-style time. But you also got some new maps in there called Legacy of Rust. They got some veteran, I'm sure they're like fan modders or fan coders. There was a whole thing about bringing in the best Doom minds to make new levels. So getting new Doom levels in 2024 is just a sick idea in itself. And I love overall what Night Dive and Digital Eclipse are doing. I'm mentioning Digital Eclipse because they're right alongside Night Dive, even though Night Dive are the main team responsible for the Doom remasters and Star Wars Dark Forces. But Digital Eclipse just gave us Worms Anniversary Edition as well, where they also go in there and do what is becoming the Atari thing of sitting down and talking to the original developers, getting, in Worms' case, the original creators of Worms to be like, did you expect this to be a thing 20 odd years ago? And I just think that's a really essential addition to the industry. We never get sit-downs, talking head style documentaries within video games to show you who made the games and how they came up with the ideas. I think that stuff is essential. Tetris Forever is coming out soon as well. And also the remaster of 2002's The Thing is out in hopefully the next few weeks. They haven't got a specific date for that just yet, but it might be out by the time this video goes up. But still, the way that this is all coming together, like I said, is the Lord's work. Like, this is an essential addition to a medium, to an art form that hasn't been done this well till now, and something like, if I narrowed it all the way back down to the games, Doom 1 and 2 and the Star Wars Dark Forces remaster are just stellar. They're just the best versions of those games that you could play.
It's such a novel way to do a remaster or a repackaging of a couple of titles that you have probably played to death. Like you said, Doom has been available in so many forms across the years, but that idea of getting in new levels, I think, is kind of absolutely genius and doesn't get shouted out as much as it should. They did the same thing with the Quake games, essentially building an entire sequel into the remaster and giving you a Quake follow-up that you didn't even know you wanted or missed. You know, like you said, getting back some of those original minds to contribute new levels and new campaigns within the original engine, within the original art style, without making any kind of concessions. I just think it's so cool that these versions exist, and in an era where we do have access to so many different versions of the same game, allows it to stand out, especially if you get that version for free if you've owned a previous iteration. It is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to do kind of video game archival.
Yeah, well, it makes the history of gaming interactive. You get to see the people who put things together. I'm hoping that on a long enough timeline, we get bigger versions of this. Like, you got a taste of it with the remaster of Last of Us 2 this year, where you had levels that were cut from the original game, but you could go through them with developers' commentary. Things like that are what I'm getting at. I get that it's in an industry that is so penny pinchy when it comes to just only do this specific thing. Even though development budgets spiral out of control or whatever, it's rare that developers or studios have time to do sit-down talking head things, or they can plan, to be able to do talking head segments across an entire game's development. It's only the likes of Double Fine's Psych Odyssey, when they were making Psychonauts 2, that I can even really think of as something like that. But I hope this is indicative of the future of the industry, which is more respect for the past, making sure that you actually can see how games are put together. It's just cool. If you care about games, it's just cool. Everything that Atari's doing here is awesome.
Number 3, System Shock. Speaking of Night Dive Studios, Scott Tailford, it's funny you mentioned them because entirely accidentally and literally until 2 minutes ago, I wasn't certain on this fact, but they also created my number 3 pick, which is the System Shock remake,
Hell yeah,
which,
it is.
interestingly, I find kind of falls somewhere between a remaster and a full-on Resi 4 style remake. It is indebted to the original, sometimes admittedly to a fault. System Shock, the original, is less remembered than its iconic sequel, and kind of for a reason. It was the first effort at this wider idea. It is more straightforward in terms of being closer to a first-person shooter Metroidvania style title where you don't have anything really in the way of character builds like you do in the second game, or stats or anything like that. It's just you finding a bunch of keys in an area, solving puzzles to unlock new areas and get through the game. But that tightness, that efficiency has been so well captured by Night Dive in this remake. remake, and it retains all of those unique elements that made the original this beginning for an entire genre in a way, whilst updating things where necessary, i.e. the gunplay, i.e. the visuals, which strike this excellent balance between retro and modern. It kind of... The art style, I would describe it as being an upscaled version of your own memory. It's kind of how you remember games like this looking in the past. So it has a little of that polygonal imperfectness, but, you know, rendered in the highest resolutions.
I'll take it,
and
man.
with lovely textures. Just fundamentally, though, System Shock, it plays well. It is a satisfying game to sink your teeth into. The regular gameplay loop of clearing out rooms and, like I said, becoming a master of the space. I think that is integral to games like this, and you can see, and it made me appreciate the titles that it influenced. You know, I'm such a Prey reboot guy, and even though I still obviously love that game, I realized how much titles like that were taking from this original by going back to it. It did release on PC last year, and it finally came to console this year, so, you know, the likes of me, a console scrub, could finally get around to it. It's one that I would recommend to people who love that immersive sim style of gameplay. Don't come to this if you're just looking for straight up first person shooting across a space station. It does require a more methodical approach. It is slower paced, but I find that to be so rewarding because it requires the use of your brain as much as it does the reflexes that you've gained from first-person shooters across the years. Joe Johnston is my test audience for this because I recommended it to him earlier in the year.
Yes.
Our beloved editor, Joe Johnston, who might be even editing this video, I don't know.
He might be.
And he loved it as well. And like I said, I wasn't a System Shock guy, but it is, proof of why it's so important. And like you said, it's just a great way to bring back an old classic from a studio that is now so good at bringing back old classics.
I do love as well the amount of options that you have for the puzzle solving side of things, the combat difficulty. You can tweak a lot of that stuff. Like obviously the original System Shock being from the mid-90s, I think 93, but I could be wrong. Still, that being such an older game, you know, sometimes it's just, no, you messed up, go way back, the checkpointing kind of sucks, and do this all over again. Some people love that stuff, but I think when you bring something back that is this old, it's nice to see the options that are then put in for like, hey, look, if you just want some waypointing so you're not going to get lost, because the original System Shock is known for just, part of the charm is being lost in the space station.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you're just like, oh my God, I only have 2 hours to play right now, I just want to know where I'm going, I like that they put that stuff in. So it is all round one of the best, reapproaches of a video game in modern history. And it didn't sell that well either. I remember when it debuted, it only hit like number 38 on the UK charts. So it seems like it is the very definition of a hidden gem. Number 2, Star Wars Outlaws, goddammit.
Oh!
Star Wars Outlaws, this game deserves its flowers, it deserves the attention. I know that Ubisoft themselves have got out there and said that the stealth wasn't as good as they thought it could be, and they ended up reassigning, the game's got a new creative director post-launch, because they're going to do a new version of it in 2025, where they're going to tweak various parts of the game. Guys, you don't need to. The game is awesome as it is. There are 4 planets to this game. 2 of them aren't as good as the other 2 could be, but the likes of Tatooine and the opening planet, Toshara, are both phenomenal. The sense of place in this game reminded me, and I'll say this, of Red Dead Redemption 2. I had a phenomenal time with this game. I love the mini games in it. I love playing the card games with the various alien races. I love the mix of stealth and combat. I even don't mind Kay Vess. To be fair, though, that character is written in a way that is very Disneyfied in the modern day, and that can be very off-putting to a lot of people. I can get on board with that just enough. I had a phenomenal time with this game, and I do find, quite like Prince of Persia, The Lost Crown, that the more people who actually play Outlaws and don't just go with the assumption that it sucks, come away going, this is actually extremely well put together. It looks absolutely gorgeous. It has some of the best implementations of ray tracing of the whole year. And I just think it's worth visiting. If you have Ubisoft Plus or something like that, you can pick it up. It's part of a subscription service. And it just is, like I said, one of the definitions of the title of this video. It is absolutely a game that is extremely overlooked. I'll be amazed if they can bring it back in a way next year that re-stimmies the interest in it. I think you'd have to gut considerable parts of it. But like I said, I really liked it. The upgrade path's really cool. All the different characters that you can talk to, all the different things that they then teach you. I did then find to have good implementation on the gameplay side. And I just loved it. I had a really, really good time. Dogfighting cool, stealth cool, combat cool. It's a cool game. Cool.
Scott, I almost don't even want to add anything to this. I can only echo that I also had a good time with it, and I would definitely agree with not paying full price for this thing. But if you can get it on the cheap, if you can get it via that Ubisoft subscription like we did, it is definitely worth that discounted price because there is so much fun to be had here. There are so many nuggets of great ideas and ideas that I think push forward the Ubisoft mold and formula that make it, and it does pain me to say this, more Red Dead-esque in how emergent and lived in the entire world and the structure of the quests actually feel. It is... I had no expectations for this thing, and I came out pleasantly surprised, and I do think it is one of those titles that you said that when you sit down and actually play it, you realize, oh, this is actually good.
I had a really lovely time with it, and I like the array of jackets that you can get. I like being... And the thing is, in regards to the Prince of Persia, or Ubisoft's wider marketing, I think they do a disservice not showcasing the best parts of the game. In Outlaws' case, they showed off a fetch quest as a way of showing what the game can do or whatever, and there's so much more to it, and it is more about just slowly walking through an encampment or a city or whatever, and having everybody hustle and bustle all around you, like walking through a really fully realized version of Tatooine, doing some missions for Jabba the Hutt, or choosing to screw him over because you get more money if you side with somebody else. Not the most in-depth mechanics in that regard, but everything does come together in a way that no other Star Wars game has ever done before.
Number 1, Pacific Drive.
Nice.
Another one that I have talked about to death across this year, Scott Tailford. Pacific Drive is the gift that keeps on giving and has retained a place in my memory since I played it at the start of 2024. This is an impressive kind of survival horror game entirely centered around a car. And it has roguelike elements where you start from a garage and you can do up the bodywork of the car. You can add armor. You can change its headlights to be more powerful, to have a longer battery life, to have bigger storage, whatever it may be. And the goal is to use this vehicle to go out into this world which has been corrupted by strange phenomena that I still don't entirely know the origin of, even though I finished the story. And this section of the country that you're in has essentially been sealed off from the rest of the world. It is known as the Zone. It is very sort of Stalker-esque in that way, where you're not supposed to enter because strange things happen. And without having any combat, the game manages to be incredibly tense because, like I said, you're going into these areas and you're doing these runs, and every time you enter a part of the zone, you open yourself up to being destroyed, to being attacked, to resulting in having that run nullified because you could lose not only everything that you've picked up along the way, but you could have all of those upgrades that you've pumped into your car completely destroyed if it goes wrong, be that because of extreme weather, be that because of the strange phenomena that I mentioned. So there's always this risk reward to how long you stay in the environment and how long you spend searching and how much you're willing to risk in terms of your car's durability going forward. And I found that truly tantalizing. Every time that I returned to the garage by the skin of my teeth with a car boot full of loot, it felt amazing. Whereas on the inverse of that, every time I thought I was just about to escape and then got thoroughly wrecked and had to start over from scratch and use the bank of resources that I was saving for a rainy day just to get back up and running, those highs and those lows made it such a memorable experience. And that's not even to mention the evocative art style, the immense soundtrack that you get, and the sense of being alone in a really hostile world, and the only thing that is defending you is the 4 car doors and windscreen that surrounds you, and something can go completely wrong in an instant, but you might just get through to have the best run of your life. It's making me a believer in roguelikes, I've got to say.
Well, this thing, word of mouth on this has been really strong. There was a sales milestone hit in around about August or so, where the devs said we've hit over 600,000 copies sold. And so it seems like the more people who do play it, like a lot of the things that we've mentioned, if you give these games a chance, and I get that that's not as easy as, it's easier said than done when they have price tags attached and they're not on subscription services or whatever, but something like Pacific Drive is so immediate, so atmospheric, I haven't listened to the soundtrack and stuff yet, but that sounds interesting in itself. But overall, like I said, word of mouth's been really strong, and it seems like the momentum is there for it. As we're recording this, we're about to go into award season, so I think Pacific Drive will start to pick things up, whether it comes to art style or just best indie or things like that. Overall, though, to run all of these down, number 10, Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown.
Number 9, Flintlock: The Siege of New Dawn.
Number 8, Kunitsu-Gami: Path of the Goddess.
Number 7, Tales of Kenzera Zhao.
Number 6, Nobody Wants to Die.
Number 5, Indika.
Number 4, Doom and Star Wars Dark Forces remasters.
Number 3, System Shock.
Number 2, Star Wars Outlaws, goddammit.
And number 1, Pacific Drive.
That is a phenomenal list of video games from 2024 that you're all not playing, but you should.